Well, good morning, everybody. I am Drew Coleman, your 2020 OAR president-elect, and we're excited to bring the third issue of our Morning Missives with Drew and Jenny to you. And we've got two guests that are probably in two of the most pivotal roles, Jenny, that you could possibly be in during this COVID crisis. And I'm really excited to hear what they have to say for us this morning. Hopefully you can see this slide. A couple of housekeeping items. Excuse me, live TV, folks. A couple of housekeeping items. First of all is if you are in the Zoom room, great, and you want to chat with us, make sure to click all presenters when you go ahead and ask a question. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Last time we got hundreds of questions. We'll get to a few as we can for our presenters. If this room is full on the Oregon Realtors YouTube channel, feel free to give us a like and a comment, but also you can follow the live recording there, and we can chat there and we can share those questions as well. Jenny, what do you got this morning?
Yeah, thank you, Drew, and welcome, Christian and Jason. I'll introduce you in a moment. We're really fortunate to have both of you join us today. As I'm sure you both know, Jason, from your members and Christian just working for the governor, everybody wants to know, when are we opening and how is that going to look? And is it going to be slow? Is it going to be fast? Is it going to be, what are we going to do here? So we are really excited to hear from you both. And like Drew said, we'll take as many questions as we can from the audience. I know there will be many questions, and brace yourselves, Christian and Jason, because I'd love us to be as candid as possible about what's happening. And now that we're getting close to summer, I think people really want to know parks and family trips and lodging industry and so forth. So are we ready to take it away? And I'll introduce our two panelists today.
No time like the present, Jenny. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. On goes the glasses. First, we have Christian Gaston. Christian serves as Governor Brown's Workforce, Labor, and Revenue Policy Advisor, advising the governor on issues relating to the Oregon Employment Department, Department of Consumer and Business Services, Department of Revenue, and the Office of Workforce Investments. Gaston previously worked at Multnomah County, advising County Chair Deborah Kafoury on housing, land use, transportation, and property tax, and served Governor Kitzhaber as well. Before entering politics, Gaston was a reporter for nearly a decade, covering politics, taxes, and real estate. At least one out of three of those is our members' favorites. He lives in Southwest Portland with his wife, Sammy. Welcome, Christian. And along with Christian, we have my very dear friend and counterpart, Jason Brandt, who is the president and CEO from the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association. As you can imagine, Jason has a lot to share with you all today. Jason's expertise revolves around association management and government affairs work at the state and local levels. His vision for the hospitality industry is to continue to build upon the significant tourism growth Oregon has seen over the past decade by helping lead advocacy, communication, and education efforts for restaurant and lodging establishments. Prior to joining Orla as president and CEO in 2015, Jason served as the CEO of the Salem Area Chamber of Commerce. Jason earned his bachelor's degree in business administration with a minor in communication from Pacific Lutheran University. He received a postgraduate certification in nonprofit organizational management from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Institute program. And aside from his love for the Seahawks, he's really a great guy. So welcome, Christian and Jason. So Drew, you want to start them off here?
Let's start it off. Yeah, Christian, let's start with you. And you probably hold, I don't know if you've gotten any sleep, but as the economic advisor to the governor, I can imagine this has been a very trying time, and you're trying to balance two very difficult things, which is the economy that supports all of us from an employment standpoint, as well as public health. How are those conversations going in the governor's office?
Well, it's true. I feel like Jason and I are on a conference call nearly daily. It's been really great to work with him, even though the circumstances we're all in are not anything like great. The pandemic now has certainly turned Oregon's economy upside down, and I think daily life as well. In Oregon, from the outset of this, we've been trying to balance the need to keep Oregonians working to the extent that we can and it's safe, and the real health requirements that we take really kind of they're not unprecedented, but they're very drastic measures, interventions in the economy to bend the curve of the virus. We've been fairly successful in flattening the curve in Oregon. And many counties in Oregon still don't have a diagnosed case of COVID, but as we're watching across the country, that is not necessarily meaning that we're out of the woods yet. And so we've taken a fairly balanced approach in both how we track our progress and how we measure when it's time to lift some of the limitations on economic activity. I will note that Oregon took a different approach than many states. You've probably all heard about essential or non-essential workers and services. In Oregon, we didn't use that metric. Instead, we outlined which businesses were simply unsafe to operate and created a list of those businesses which needed to close. And that ranged from, it's really kind of a few buckets, and Jason's very familiar with these. Obviously, bars and restaurants, no on-site consumption, personal services like salons and that sort of thing, and then the tourism industry. Now, what's left outside of those categories are a lot of business services, general office, and then sort of your value-added manufacturing and construction. Some states took a different approach and closed many of those work sites in order to flatten the curve. We didn't feel that was necessary, and it's sort of borne out that our approach made sense given the work we've been doing to flatten the virus's curve. But now, as people are watching states lift sanctions across the country, I think it has created a little bit of confusion, because in many cases states are coming up to Oregon's level now, lifting restrictions that we never actually had in place. And what we're actually looking at now is take the next step.
Christian, who advises the governor? Where does she go to get her guidance on what she should do in Oregon? Does she rely on her staff or medical experts? Does she go to other governors from other states? Is she just looking at stats? Who are her number one resources to provide her the updates to make the decisions she's been making?
Jenny, it's all of those things. Jason serves on the Coronavirus Economic Advisory Council. My colleague Leah Horner and I are co-conveners of that group. We have a lot of representatives from all different business and industries, as well as labor organizations across the state. The governor also has a medical advisory board, which is made up of doctors and health professionals, and they're the ones who are really making sure that every one of these recommendations that's rolling out has the best data and the best medical thinking behind it. She's also in close contact with Governors Inslee and Newsom to the south. We entered into sort of an agreement, alignment with our West Coast states. We try to do that whenever we can. Certainly with as I mentioned, California and Washington took a little bit of a different approach in the economic sanctions they put in place to slow the growth of the virus. But as we're opening up, we're trying to make sure that services are aligned, especially shared services like transportation. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have transit operating under one rubric in Portland and a different rubric in Vancouver, for instance. So we're trying to find alignment where we can and just share our experiences. And she's in touch with those governors on a routine basis.
Wonderful. Jason, as you hear what Christian is saying, and obviously you have to react to what the governor's office does, how have your members pivoted, and what's kind of what's the feeling amongst, obviously no industries have been more affected than your members. How have they pivoted during this time, and what are you looking forward to as we go to the future here?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. I think Christian and I both feel like this is something that we need to do more of wherever possible, right? Just making sure lines of communication are opened up, that we have transparency wherever possible. So I guess to answer your question, Drew, I would say that I think our membership in the industry at large has gone through the cycles of grief. since the middle of March, really. I mean, it started with shock, and then it went through, maybe a period of denial and then shock, and then kind of realizing that, oh, this is not going to be coming back anytime soon. It's affected different restaurants and lodging properties differently depending on where they're located and their size and scope. So I would say there's rare exceptions where restaurants have been able to pivot. I know a lot of gourmet pizza places have done okay in different areas of the state, kind of pivoting to family meals and, hey, one less stressor in your life, come pick up, pizza and salads, and the OLCC has provided flexibility where you can do beer, wine, and cider to go, so you can take care of your drinks at the same time. So there's rare exceptions out there, but for the most part, to be very direct, lodging and restaurants are in an absolute world of hurt. Many of them are, specifically on the restaurant side, are not making nearly enough money through the takeout and delivery model to justify even staying open. There's kind of this cross section of reasons why restaurant operators are doing that. Some are doing it as a service to their community. They feel like it's an important part of what we need to be doing in society right now, being a part of the food supply and providing opportunities for people to get their food in a different way, maybe through value meals, or maybe through more wholesome forms of sustenance from an independent restaurant or a chain restaurant. So there's a lot of different models out there, very few of which are working to keep these operators in business if this lasts much longer. On the lodging side, of course, I mean, travel is a challenge, right? I mean, we talked about how Christian and the governor's staff, we've been kind of focused on safe and non-safe as opposed to essential and non-essential. So I think sooner rather than later, we're going to have to figure out, what are we going to do with all those lodging properties? How are we going to make sure that their bottom lines pencil out, that the servicers of those mortgages for those properties, that those obligations are met? Governor Brown on April 1st helped us a great deal with some components of this by extending the rent moratorium to commercial rents and obligations as well, for a 90-day period. So that takes us through April, May, June rents before those obligations have to be figured out between landlords and tenants. So there's been some things that have helped us, but we have a long way to go.
Yeah, Jason, I'll have a follow-up question for you, but before, several of them. Christian, can you tell us about the governor's recent order, Executive Order 20-24? I think there's a lot of confusion as to what that really means. When she said she's extending her emergency powers to July 6th, what does that mean? What does that really mean for reopening and for businesses like Jason's members and other industries as well?
Well, the emergency declaration is in many ways, it's a legal necessity for the work that we're doing around all of these emergency orders. So there's a long constitutional tradition in the United States for states and governors to have powers during public health emergencies. And in order to utilize those powers, the governor needs to have an emergency in place. The emergency declaration also enables the businesses to access aid through FEMA and through federal disaster declarations. In and of itself, it doesn't require any sort of closure or restrictions on its own. It's really just the mechanism through which the governor establishes those emergency powers. Clearly, we are in this sort of public health emergency. There's a whole host of other executive orders. For example, the rent moratorium that Jason mentioned. Each one of those is basically an individual bill, right? You can think of it that way, that has its own legal framework, and they all have kind of different schedules and different timelines. We moved really quickly to respond to the emergency as it was unfolding. And so each kind of issue area got teed up as it was apparent that action was necessary. And so as we're moving forward and trying to create a framework for reopening the economy, we're just moving to rationalize those. For example, the one on the executive order on eviction moratoriums is also running out soon, as Jason mentioned. And so we're pulling together a group to talk about, do we need to extend that? Do we need to include other pieces of it? There are some policy considerations that people have suggested we should look at. And certainly all of these things are going to have a long tail effect as well.
So that executive order just extends her power. It doesn't necessarily mean, well, that means we're delaying reopening to July 6th. It just gives her the power to do things like you just mentioned, extend the eviction moratorium or that sort of thing.
That's right.
And I guess it does give her the power to say, hey, well, we're not going to reopen either. But that's not part of what came out last week as that executive order 20-24 is part of that.
Right.
Okay. Because I think there was a lot of confusion amongst not just our members, but across the state on what that really meant. They saw the extension and they're like, oh, that means we can't open till July 7th or so. It doesn't mean that at all. It could mean that, but doesn't in and of itself. Okay.
So Jason, as we understand it, many restaurants are required to have parking lots as part of their licensure. I mean, has there been any conversation about reconfiguring parking lots into outdoor dining spaces where people can put on their tank top and sandals and grab something during the summer here?
Yeah, in answer to that question, Drew, I think that's something we have to get very creative about. In a nod to the governor's office, kind of in this set of unprecedented circumstances, I guess I would say that one of the things that I think is good about where we're heading, and it's not finalized yet, but there's signals that we might be heading this way later this week, is that our this kind of arbitrary model of a fixed percentage of capacity for restaurants is not necessarily going to make it into the final document. Instead, what you might see is more of a focus on physical distancing between parties that are inside the restaurant dining rooms. That helps us a little bit, but to your point, it doesn't get us all the way there. So one of the things we want to do, and this is actually a kind of a call to action for the realtors, if you guys want to be heroes and heroines for us, we need to mobilize, I think, at the local level with local jurisdictions about expanding outdoor seating wherever possible. So if we have a model where we have to do physical distancing of 6 feet, then what would it look like for a restaurant that otherwise would have to go out of business permanently if they were given, like let's say in the city of Salem, the ability to expand their outdoor seating around the corner of a block, if it's not another food service establishment, or if they have a parking lot, utilizing that parking lot for the similar type of need. Whatever we can do to create capacity in a way that's safe and that aligns with the Oregon Health Authority guidelines, anything that we can do creatively on that front will help save small businesses without question. So realtors, I think, are uniquely positioned to potentially assist us with city managers and city councilors and maybe shine a light on the most active and urgently initiated policies by local governments to kind of expand this outdoor model, at least in the short term while we need it.
So how many of your members, Jason, since the middle of March, have actually had to close permanently with no hope of reopening when the cloud lifts?
Yeah, so we had a survey that was done by the National Restaurant Association on this, and based on the data that we've done in partnership with them, it looks like we could be anywhere between 4 to 10% permanent closures right out of the gate. But then, of course, there's going to be an increase in that over the next year as certain restaurants try to open back up, but just realize over time, maybe months, that they just aren't going to be able to make it long term. And then they close up shop over time. So I think our starting point is probably about 10%. In Oregon, we have just over 10,000 food service locations. So it could be as many as 1,000 of the 10,000 that have to permanently close. It's still too early to know exactly what that number looks like at the beginning of that race. But a year from now is kind of what concerns me even more. Does that 10% number go up to 15 to 25%? Is it higher than that? There's a number of economists, and not just in our country, but around the world, that have kind of analyzed the food service industry in particular. And many feel the minority are only going to be able to survive permanently if this extends, 4 months or longer. So, I mean, our start point on all of this was middle of March. We're sitting here just a little bit into May. So, we're we're approaching upon the 2-month mark. So if you look at it like a football game and think about your favorite team, Jenny, the Seahawks, not the 49ers, um, you could kind of think about it as halftime coming up pretty soon here, regarding how many might have to permanently close and how many might not have to, depending on how long the restrictions are in place. But it's very concerning, especially for our industry. Once we breach that Memorial Day weekend front, I mean, a lot of folks in our industry kind of store up their acorns. I would say the larger folks are able to do that better than the smaller folks. So then you start seeing divisions within our industry too, once we start missing those high demand points. And of course, demand is relative in this scenario, right? We're not really sure how consumers come back in the first place, but the first hump is just giving consumers the freedom to make the choice as to whether they're going to travel a short distance, maybe stay overnight for a special occasion, or go out to one of their favorite dining rooms and give it a shot. But we won't know what demand looks like until that's opened up.
Christian, tell us about the phase-in plan. What's it look like?
So we're actually working on a lot of those details right now. I mentioned, Jenny, I didn't bring my my trusty slideshow because it's a little bit out of date. One place that folks can track this stuff actually is the website for the Coronavirus Economic Advisory Council. If you Google Coronavirus Economic Advisory Council Oregon, you'll find the website. We've got materials that Jason's mentioning on there. Each sector, we convened a number of sector conversations to have businesses discuss what the regulations might make sense for the next phase of this. It's going to depend on county, and it's going to depend on the healthcare capacity at the ground level. The three things that people should think about that you really need to have in place are comprehensive contact tracing. So when somebody comes down with the coronavirus, you can figure out who they've talked to, robust testing, and then the ability to quickly move someone into quarantine. Those are the three pieces that have been really instrumental in other countries in having a limit on growth of the virus while having sort of more like normal operations in place. So we don't have a timeline. Unfortunately, the virus sort of sets the timeline for us with these things, but we're looking at 14-day increments once we reach sort of thresholds, and counties have put in place this plan for testing and contact tracing, and they've shown that they don't have growing virus cases. You'll sort of stage your way through each step. So if you're doing the math on the back of your envelope, I think we're probably looking for another month or so here as we move forward. Some communities may be able to start lifting restrictions by June. I will say that in large metro areas where we've seen the bulk of cases, that's going to be more difficult, right? You've got a higher threshold to reach that testing capacity. You've got more complications in being able to provide the level of medical response to prevent the virus's spread. And you've just got more complicating factors like widespread transit usage and higher densities. So that's all to say that there's more to come this week. The governor obviously would love to see Oregon return to something that looks like normal, and we're working very hard to get as much guidance out as possible. So you're going to see more of that rolling out very shortly.
And is that a kind of one size fits all approach across counties, or what metrics are you guys looking at for a fully open economy? Is it a flattened curve in Oregon? Is it a flattened curve in West Coast states? Nationally, a certain number of new cases, deaths, or what are metrics you guys are evaluating as you're figuring out? And will everything be statewide, or will you kind of look at where cases are county by county, Christian?
So it depends on each piece of this sort of relies on a different piece of public infrastructure. So when you're talking about hospital capacity, that's a metric that you're going to look at at the medical regional level, where through our CCO networks and through sort of the historic relationships that medical facilities have, they can track the ability to sort of move people through the medical system. The counties also play a pivotal role, and as Jason mentioned, local governments do as well. So each county will be needing to put in place the plan that shows that their public health agency is ready to respond, that they have the resources necessary, that they have the procedures in place. And as we move forward, each of those sort of steps will need to meet each of those thresholds before we start lifting local restrictions. And I do have to say that this, it sounds perhaps bureaucratic, but these are really the mechanisms that we're putting in place to prevent a huge breakout, sort of second wave of virus, right? Jason mentioned that we don't know exactly what consumer confidence looks like. And I have to say that lifting restrictions too quickly and creating a sort of sudden panic as there's a hot spot someplace is surely one of the easiest ways to shatter that consumer confidence. We need to move forward cautiously and make sure that everybody feels like we're on the right track, because we have to work together to make it through this. And if we do it right, we'll have a much more orderly return to normal.
So I want to follow up on the contact tracing you mentioned. Are you saying, is that going to be a requirement for members like Jason's, the restaurants? They're going to have some mechanism in place? I don't see how that realistically can be implemented and enforced. And how in the world are you going to track it down?
So contact tracing already does exist at the county health level. Early on in the outbreak, we were really using the local public health folks to track every one of the cases and figure out who they had contacted so that we could try and contain the spread. Once we reached the point where we were in a community spread situation where, like the flu or a cold, it was out in the community, it wasn't coming into the community from out of the United States. We rolled that contact tracing back because we needed to redeploy those health resources in the clinics to provide sort of care directly. The question about which businesses may be able to give county health guidance or support in outlining who has been at a hotspot, right? I think there was a story recently about a concept where you might have a sign-in sheet or something like that. That is certainly a tool that people could use, and for some businesses that's going to be easy. For some businesses that's already what they do, right? They, in order to enter the facility, you have to sign in on a sign-up sheet or something like that. This is all new territory. It's not necessarily going to be a requirement, but it's certainly going to be a tool that people can use as county health authorities are trying to figure out exactly where an infection came from and who might need to be quarantined to prevent its spread.
Yeah, and that's of course assuming the customer that visited the business reports it back to the business that they have it, and just quite the domino effect. It'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out.
So, well, I think, really the step before people start going to restaurants is to get barbers open, because I pulled my hair into a nice ponytail, which I've never been able to do before. But people are not going to want to go out unless they get a haircut to Jason's restaurants and hotels. Jason, I can neither confirm nor deny that 86% of alcohol consumed at restaurants is by realtors. So you're speaking to the right audience here. What can realtors do to help restaurants in this time? I mean, I just heard that kind of a neighborhood staple, Clyde Common, closed yesterday. I know that the Pok Pok has about a $500,000 a month payroll that they've obviously had to completely cut down. What can we do to support these establishments that really make Oregon, and our fun restaurant and entertainment scene is a big part of why people want to live here? What can we do now?
Yeah, a couple things. So in addition to the kind of partnering with our industry, maybe through chambers of commerce at the local level to start opening up these lines of communication about outdoor seating for restaurants, we can also start thinking about look out into the future, maybe into the fall, hopefully, maybe the late summer. What does that trip look like if you're thinking about going out to the coast again, or going to Central Oregon or the Gorge or Eastern Oregon or Southern Oregon? I mean, there's so many different eclectic places that we can enjoy with our families, hopefully not too far in the distant future. So if you check with, maybe some of your favorite places to stay, maybe you're in a position financially to put a deposit down on a future trip. Those situations look different depending on what operation or property we're talking about those. So giving them a call, finding out where they're at. There are some places on the South Coast that are starting to open up, because again, lodging isn't closed. It was not closed by the governor's office, but many lodging properties are still voluntarily closed because the demand was not there. So we have this checkerboard situation with our lodging side of the industry, depending on what geographic area in the state we're in. And then you have the added confusion of the coastal communities having additional stringent regulations about what lodging has to do to adhere to their regulations, and that was due to increased pressure from residents that didn't want travelers bringing the virus with them to the coast. And so you have that dynamic, which will be challenging in the future as well. But I mean, Drew, takeout, delivery, think about how you can support those independent businesses now, some of those great places in your own community with those orders. And then plan a couple trips later in the year that you can put deposits down on, or provide some support to the lodging properties with.
So Jason, does it really pencil out for your members when we do this phase in? They can reopen at 50% capacity. Let's assume the sidewalk around the block parking lot is not permitted. I mean, how are these restaurants going to be able to really financially make it in that sort of scenario? You have to bring back all your staff, or at least some staff. You have to have a certain number, the cooks, the wait staff, the bartenders. How is it really going to pencil out to be open at 50% capacity with 6 feet social distancing between the parties? And I mean, what's that looking like? Have any of your members commented on that to you?
Yeah, a lot have commented to us on that, and it's concerning to say the least. I mean, in normal times, our industry kind of operates on 3 buckets of expenses. You got your food bucket, you got your labor bucket, and then you have your operational bucket, your rents, your utilities, your music licensing fees, all that stuff. And after you add up the money that it costs to run that restaurant in those 3 buckets, usually if you count that as, cents on the dollar, we're usually somewhere between 95 cents to 97 cents. So the average restaurant in America before the coronavirus operates on 3 to 5% margin. It's just an extraordinary undertaking to be out there trying to run this type of a business in normal times. So you can only imagine what this is going to look like in this new normal. So what you're going to see, Jenny, are skeleton crews on the labor side. You're probably going to see limited menus to reduce the costs and the liabilities associated with having more options on the menus that could relate to both food waste issues and then also unneeded expense. So maybe a lot of the popular items will be on these, revised menus. And then on the operational side, you're just going to see them working behind the scenes, trying to negotiate deals with their landlords, make sure they're cutting down any fixed costs as much as possible. They'll probably make a run at that 3 to 6 months, see how they're faring, and then make the next decision from there. But it's really going to be an in the moment exercise, I think, for them for the next few months once we start the phasing process.
Yeah. Oh, well, I try to help out my local watering holes and restaurants, and I'll continue to do so. Well, one, because I prefer it over cooking. So it's a nice way to help the industry out.
Yeah. One thing we could do, I mean, a lot of the margin is in the alcohol because, our our favorite customers, the realtors, like to buy a lot of alcohol. I heard recently someone told me that. So I was thinking maybe Christian could help us with a special change in statute. A lot of states have done cocktails to go. So we have beer, wine, and cider right now. And this might seem like a small issue, and maybe it is in the scheme of things, but our industry we possibly can save dozens, maybe a few hundred restaurants if we figured out how to free up that statute language in a special session of the legislature and allow, in addition to cider, wine, and beer, allow for cocktails to go here. Just in the short term as a temporary thing, similar to other states, the margin on that particular product is significant. And so anywhere we can find margin where there's all these other issues where there is no margin, potentially help save some small businesses, for what it's worth.
Isn't that all part of the governor's emergency powers, Christian? Doesn't she have the ability to do that to help out Jason's members?
I'd have to look at that statute. Each one of them is a little bit different. But
we need legislators on that one. The governor's office would be in the position of helping influence the need for a bipartisan vote if that was included in a broader comprehensive bill, but we would need legislative action on that one.
Sounds reasonable.
Christian, we're seeing a lot of comments that, hey, I'm in a county that only has 3 cases, yet everything is closed down. The economic impact seems far worse to us and to our members than the health impact. And there's also been some questions about, we're adding this tracking and tracing to restaurants, but grocery stores don't seem to have a mandate as far as how people will be treated when they come in. A lot of grocery stores of their own accord have done a very good job of putting in protocols. How will that be balanced as we go forward?
Yeah, so I should have made it a little clearer in the contact tracing conversation. So that is a function of county public health. So public health officials will, as soon as they understand that somebody's tested positively, they'll basically it's kind of like a forensic. It's like CSI for county health, right? So you go out and you figure out who they've talked to, where they've been, where the where the spread might have occurred, and then they go and contact those folks and figure out who they've talked to, basically to try and get testing in place and see who might have picked up the virus from somebody who's tested positively. To the extent that businesses can provide information to those county health officials as they're doing that contact tracing, that's fantastic. That's a really helpful way to help prevent hotspots from occurring. But as you mentioned, every business is going to have different capacity there, right? And I think people understand that. To the question about rural communities with few cases, I think we do have to keep in mind that the United States as a nation was not in a position to deploy widespread testing when this hit our shores, and we still are really catching up. And so we have a limited view into knowing exactly how many cases are in our community, and many people don't show any symptoms from this, right? So there are lots of folks walking around everywhere that could be harboring the virus, and we just don't know. Now, hospitalizations and injury from the virus is a really key indicator, and so our health authority at the state level has a fairly high confidence that we don't have an outsized number of undiagnosed virus cases in the state, because if we did, we would be seeing more folks presenting at the emergency rooms and the hospitals throughout the state. But it's something to keep in mind that the metrics on the ground, if you've got a couple of cases in your county, it doesn't mean that you're free and clear, and those are the only cases that exist. And it also means that you've got to be careful, and we've all got to work together to make sure that those cases are the only ones that show up.
So Christian, while I can speak on behalf of the realtors, at least most, because you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. We're very appreciative that the governor did not put real estate in the closed category. It's obviously real estate is very important for the Oregon economy. It always has been. It will continue to be so. But some of our members, I mean, they're still actively working. they want to continue to work. And while it is a choice for our members, they don't have to work during this time if they don't want to. Is there, as part of the phase in, how in the weeds will the governor get as far as setting protocols, say for open houses again? Is it still going to be just following social distancing guidelines? Is she going to absolutely limit the number of people that can be out and in houses? And while we expect our members to put safety first for both them and their clients, they still would like some sort of guidance from the governor on what's permissible, what's not, and when are we really going to reopen? And I know it's hard for you to give an answer, but are we going to see some significant changes this month?
For businesses that were given the broad, directive to maintain social distancing, your experience is going to be pretty similar moving forward. The one thing that could, impact the real estate industry, I'd imagine, is the mass gathering ban will eventually get lifted in the out stages of this, and so you'll see guidance where you move up to 50 or 75 or a cap of 150. And I saw somebody asking a question about weddings and outdoor gatherings, and that's really what'll affect the safety of those. I think for realtors, I would recommend, if you're holding some sort of open house, or try to think about how to do that in a social distancing world, that Oregon OSHA is actually a really good resource there. They've posted a lot of guidance from the CDC on their website, and you can certainly reach out to them directly if you've got questions. They're in a mode where they really want to help people to get to compliance, as opposed to enforcement. And so if you've got any questions around what steps should I be taking to do my business safely, they're a great resource.
That's good to know. What's the mass gathering number right now? What's considered a mass gathering as of today?
Well, I think mass gatherings aren't allowed right now, but I apologize that I don't have that. That number had been moving on me, and I'm not sure if I have the latest number off the top of my head.
I think it's 10 currently, if I'm not mistaken. And luckily, Jenny doesn't have that many friends. But for a lot of us, it's kind of a difficult threshold to hit. Let me ask you this. I mean, Jason, how obviously there's been a ton of federal money that's gone out there, and it's gone to different places. How have you, Jason, through your lobbying efforts, and you, Christian, I'd imagine it's more through the channels with Wyden and Merkley and all of our representatives as well. How have you guys worked on getting those dollars into Oregon and supporting your members and our Oregon residents?
Yeah, Drew, so that's just a huge mixed bag. We have a number of restaurant and lodging facilities that were successful getting Paycheck Protection Program loans. Others have not been as successful. And there's a lot of different schools of thought too about how you use that money. For our industry, when you're forced to close ultimately, with the exception of takeout and delivery on the restaurant side, and if you have enough demand to stay open on the lodging side, you're trying to figure out what percentage of that PPP loan you can actually use in a way that will be forgiven when it's all said and done. So, we got 8 weeks of a time frame. We're pretty much sitting right at an 8-week mark here on May 5th. I mean, if you want to spend it by June 30th, and this is for the first batch of the PPP loans that were given out, you have to, figure out how to bring back as many staff as possible, and you're kind of focused on full-time equivalents. The example I use is, let's say you got a $400,000 PPP loan. You have a 75-25 split on that 400K. So 300 has to be spent on payroll, 100 on your other fixed costs. So 100 could be forgiven, your rent, utilities, that kind of stuff. The 75%, the 300,000 is associated with payroll. So if you don't have demand for your services like you used to have, then how much of that 300,000 can you actually spend over an 8-week period? And then you have the added challenge of people receiving more by staying at home than by returning to work because of the weekly benefit on the unemployment side from the feds, which extends through July 30th. So there's kind of these interesting crosswinds. There are some creative ideas out there. For example, you don't have to bring back the people you actually furloughed or laid off. You could potentially hire specialized people to come in and actually be on your payroll. Think about things that you want to do to remodel your business. Maybe you want to put a carpenter on your payroll for 8 weeks. Maybe you want to have a painter come in, paint your building exterior or interior for 8 weeks. So as long as you're bringing FTE back, there's some proportional forgiveness for what those funds look like. And there also was recent guidelines just established earlier this week that more guidance from the Treasury that said if you actually try to bring one of your past staffing people back and you're unable to do it because they're receiving these extra unemployment benefits and making more staying at home than coming back to work, then that effort on behalf of the employer will be considered in your loan forgiveness, which was a nice step in the right direction. So yeah, lots of things going on, but putting all that aside, let's say none of your loan that of 400,000 was forgiven somehow, which I think is a stretch. Some of it will be forgiven for sure, but anything that's not forgiven, the payments start on that 6 months after the loan is initiated, and you have this kind of 2-year 1% payback period, which is about as good of a loan as you'll ever find for the rest of our lives. So there's that as well.
Yeah.
So Christian, do you have any, sorry, Drew, do you want to?
No, I think you're gonna ask the same thing, Jenny. Take it away.
I don't know if I am. I'm going back to Christian. I mean, we're 40th, right? Oregon's ranked 40th. That's pretty low. So we've done a great job. Fantastic. But what I'm curious about is the numbers. We've had over 100 deaths that have been classified as corona. Where were those out of VA hospitals, nursing homes, hospitals across the state equally? How have you looked at where those deaths have come from?
They are largely all over the state. There are some counties that haven't had cases in the rural part of the state. For a while, Washington County and Marion counties were the two with kind of the highest saturation of diagnosed cases. I think Multnomah County overtook took a top spot there, if that's how you describe it. We clearly. So I mentioned the community spread early on. In February, we started to track this in the governor's office. And at that point, we were really, concerned about folks coming in from overseas where there was a high incidence of virus, bringing it into the United States. And that's certainly what we saw in Washington and Oregon to begin with. And shortly afterwards, though, by March, we had the virus actively moving throughout the community, and it was no longer possible to. We were seeing cases where somebody hadn't interacted with somebody who had recently come back from Wuhan or China or South Korea, but instead they had only been interacting with people here locally in Oregon. So that meant that the virus had spread throughout the community, and you were. You faced odds of catching it just by moving around the community, right? And that's really the trigger for the stay-at-home orders and the restrictions on travel. I do want to add something about the economy, though. I think Jason has highlighted a really important factor for folks to think about. This is an economic situation unlike the last recession, or really any recession that we have on the books. I think the ratings agencies are looking at a 5% reduction in GDP. You have to go back to World War II to find numbers like that. It's really an extraordinary downturn, and it's structured in a different way, right? So if you look back at the Great Recession, that was a financial crisis that created weakness in the markets and pulled capital out of the economy, and you didn't see the sort of demand reductions that impact businesses like Jason's members until fairly late into the process, right? It wasn't 2008 where we saw a lot of Main Street closures. It was really 2009 and into 2010 with the follow-on effect of more money coming out of the economy from the public sector retracting. This is completely different. We're seeing a huge, perhaps 20% reduction in just sort of general commercial activity. And on the front end, it really is those Main Street businesses that are seeing the brunt of the impact. So this is a really different kind of economic moment. low wage workers and people who don't have a lot of savings are the ones who are disproportionately impacted by this economic event. That's, you know, who's making up the rolls of the nearly 300,000 folks who filed for unemployment insurance with the state of Oregon. And so how we come out of this from an economic standpoint is we're going to need different approaches. It's been really heartening to see the federal government moving quickly. And I think the PPP is an example of the kind of flexible problem solving that we're seeing out of Washington, DC. We're going to have to do a lot more though, to really get people back on track.
So Christian, I mean, obviously the longer this goes, there's more increasing impatience and paranoia among the population. And some people feel that, hey, this is a power grab and we're working, you know, how are people's individual rights being compromised versus, hey, this is a genuine attempt to protect our citizens. How's the governor monitoring that? And how is she ensuring that this is a short-term thing and not a long-term lack of personal freedom?
Well, I think what I would say is clearly Jason and I are on a lot of conference calls. I keep raising his name, but you know, he makes a good point about businesses who are trying to figure out what their market looks like, right? So just my wife operates a wine bar before the shutdown in Northwest Portland. She's trying to figure out how to sort of change her business model and accommodate the new reality we all find ourselves in. If you raised, what we don't know is if you raised all restrictions tomorrow, kind of what level of consumer confidence exists to return to sort of those Main Street businesses that might open. You know, on the one hand, I hear from business owners who are chomping at the bit to open. I also hear from business owners who don't feel like it's safe and they don't want to open, and they want an order to be in place so that they have something to sort of back up that decision. I think there's also a lot of concern among workers about returning to work too early if they don't feel like it's safe. This is not going to be easy territory to navigate. And I think it's not just a matter of kind of what do the restrictions say or what do the regulations say, but really how do we all navigate this as a community, because we're going to need to work together.
Christian, this morning on the news, I saw, and I'm sure many of our listeners saw, a salon operator that said, I can't go another day with no money, I'm opening. So what is the governor prepared to do about the businesses that are clearly on the closed list as of now, that just, it's more important to the business owners to feed their family, pay their rent, than to abide by this restriction? I anticipate that might happen more often than expected.
So for businesses with employees, you know, the executive order puts in place health and safety standards for workplaces. And so if you're violating any of those health and safety standards, whether you're a hospital or you know, a restaurant or you know, a real estate office, then Oregon OSHA does have the authority to levy fines if you're really out of compliance, if you're really willfully out of compliance. For an individual business owner who, you know, wants to violate the executive order, you know, that's going to come with personal liability, and there are you know, penalties outlined in the executive order. But I do want to say that while this is extraordinarily difficult to navigate, these restrictions aren't in place for an arbitrary reason. They're not there, you know, to punish anyone or prevent people from doing what they want to do. They're really there to stop the virus's spread, and you know, we all need to work together to do that.
I guess one of the things on that point, Christian, that I think it applies to our industry as well, in addition to personal services, is people are right now literally, you know, losing sleep at night, trying to figure out what they're supposed to do morally between putting food on the table. They literally are running out of cash. So I think it would be a different scenario if we had 100% coverage on the unemployment line. It's like, hey, government has your back in the meantime, right? We have money for you over here to help you weather this storm. It's not going to be, the same amount of money you're used to spending or the same amount of food on your table, but no one's going to, be starving or dealing with hunger. And we got food banks for that, of course, as well. But when you have small business owners that are having to choose between putting food on the table and following the governor's directive, and they're dealing with the situation that Lindsay's dealing with in Salem, which apparently is lack of ability to access the unemployment line, probably because of the self-employed issues that I think have recently been addressed. But, that's a really tough spot for people that don't have that backstop because of the inefficiencies in the employment department. So, I mean, what do we tell those people?
Well, the unemployment department is working around the clock to reduce their backlog. I'm sorry, my cat is trying to weigh in on this question as well.
He's hungry.
So we've got about 300,000 claims in the Oregon unemployment department. We've got a backlog down to about 70,000 claims now. The department is processing claims faster than they're coming in now. As Jason mentioned, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, which is a new program, which really qualifies most people who were unqualified for unemployment in the past, is now live. You can access that on the Oregon Employment Department's website. The average turnaround for payments through the unemployment department is still 2 to 3 weeks, which is the sort of standard turnaround. Now, there are folks who are experiencing a longer lag time than that. Some of those folks were self-employed folks who weren't qualified for unemployment benefits until that pandemic unemployment assistance went into effect last week. And other folks may have miskeyed their information or simply have an issue from the past that needs to be sorted through. In good times, the employment department would be able to spend a little TLC with extra resources to just move quickly through that. If you've got 5,000 claims with a lot of complications, it's one thing. We've got about 30,000 claims with a lot of complications, and so the level of work is pretty extraordinary here. We've gone from 100 folks in place processing those claims to now almost 600, and we're on track to get 800 people in place. So that backlog in unemployment should shift. It should draw down here in a couple of weeks. But Jason, your point is a good one. The safety net in the United States is just not really structured or sufficient enough to handle a massive shutdown in economic activity like this. And I think everybody's feeling the cracks.
And given that our state is ranked so low, at some point, sooner rather than later, the governor is going to have to pull the trigger and say, I trust you, business owners. You'll follow the proper CDC guidelines. We will be monitoring. And if you don't, then we will implement some penalties. But it's not even giving them a chance to put the proper protocols in place to continue to make a living. And I know it's a tough spot. You let them all do it, then we might see some cases surge. But it just seems like we're not going to know unless we start easing them into it and letting them reopen.
Yeah, the reality is we're going to be living with this virus, whether you're in Oregon, whether you're on the other side of the world, we're going to be living with this virus. So we have to get used as a society, we have to get used to physical distancing in everything that we do for a while. That's our responsibility, I think, as Oregonians, right? So it's not as much about what businesses should have the right to operate and what businesses shouldn't. I think we need to quickly pivot into this positioning where we all are physically distancing regardless of what industry we're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. We need to do it in a safe way, but everyone should be given the opportunity to prove that they can do it, and they can do it in a safe way for their employees and their guests. And it needs to happen soon, because if it doesn't, it's just going to get worse. And it feels like we get a couple more permanent closures every day the longer this draws out. So concerned about it.
Christian, last words. We really appreciate you both being here. Is there anything that, any timelines that are concrete that you can give to our members? We're getting a lot about, hey, golf courses are open, but I'd love to go to a state park as a pressure relief valve. any concrete timelines that you can provide? And I know that may be a moving target, but
I will say, yeah, saw that comment on the thread. We're trying to get the state parks open as soon as possible. The issue there was that they became de facto mass gathering places in the early days of the shutdown. And again, I'll just add that you know, in Oregon we've taken a different approach where most businesses can operate with social distancing in place. The businesses where there is more stringent restrictions, pardon me, are really those businesses where you've got people who they're gathering places, right? And so those are places where the virus really does spread, and that's why we took those steps. But as Jason knows, we are working right now to get guidance out for those businesses as well. Once counties have in place the testing protocols and the contact tracing, we'll start to ease restrictions, and we'll get people back.
I think Christian's cat really likes your idea, Jason, of like delivery cocktails, maybe like a White Russian, something with some milk in it. I think it's.
Be careful there, Drew. You don't want PETA on your back.
Yeah, yeah, it's code for catnip. That's what this realtors call catnip. Yeah, I thank you very much, Jason and Christian. And I know, Christian, you're definitely on the hot seat a lot these days, and we appreciate you being with us. And Jason, we feel for you. If our members can help your members, we're here. Maybe we can partner up in some to-go thing or something to help your folks out.
Actually, if you go to Oregon's, our website, OregonRLA.org, there's Takeout and a Movie. We're featuring the new independent film, Phoenix, Oregon. And you can kind of promote it today by just going on, picking a place that you want to support. All of the proceeds that don't go to the film creators are going to go to support restaurants that are feeding people in need. So 100% of our share of the movie ticket sales go to those restaurants that are doing that type of a service. So you can check it out right now. I'll put it in the chat box, I guess, really quick, just so folks know where the website is.
I already put that there for you, Jason.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, Drew, wrap.
Well, you're right. I mean, you two gentlemen are probably on the hottest of hot seats, and we've seen it even in the chat during this live webinar that we've done between our members. You're reading the comments where half of our members say, with the deaths doubling, we're never going to open. The others are saying, let them work. It's an impossible decision, and we just taking politics out of it. We empathize with everyone in this. I mean, we're all in this together as Oregonians. I think we all want to get back to work, but we all want to be safe. So we thank you gentlemen both for all of your hard work. I know it's not an easy place, and whether it's a V-shaped recovery, or it's a checkmark recovery, or it's a U-shaped recovery, I think the best thing we can all do as individuals is focus on a YOU-shaped recovery, which is do what we can within our own lives to bounce back from this, and make some good memories with the family while you can, and eliminate the regrets. And I'm excited if anyone can bounce back, it's Oregonians, and it's the members of our realtor family.
Definitely. Very clever, Drew. YOU. Clever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jason, Christian, and to my fabulous co-host, Drew. Have a great day, and we'll see you all soon.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.